where Gentiles interact with the bluish Jew timeline. And so we're going to put the Gentiles in where they belong. Now, you're going to find places where there's not a lot of Gentile interaction. Why? Because God is giving us specifically Jewish history. He's giving us information about the Jews, but he's not interacting very much with the Gentiles. Now, the Gentiles are important. We're going to talk about the Gentiles being important. Most of you, if you don't have any Jewish background, Jewish blood, this is concerning us. This is where we come in. And we ought to thank God for the yellow part of the timeline, because this is where we get brought in and where we have the opportunity to receive Christ as well. And I'm going to show you from the very outset that it was God's plan. God has always had a worldwide plan. Always, from the very beginning. It was not God's plan to just have the Jewish people and for the Jewish people to come in and him remain Jewish the entire time and just be the king of the Jews. No, his plan was to choose the Jewish people on the basis of what he knew the Jewish people would do. He knew the Jewish people would not be the light that they're supposed to be. He knew the Jewish people would reject him. And because he knew of their rejection, he chose them. He used them in that way. He still loves them and has a plan for them. But at the same time, when you talk about the Gentiles, God used the rejection of the Jewish people to open the door of the gospel to the Gentiles. And so we'll talk about that on our storyline as we go here tonight. All right, so the goal here is to kind of help us. Now, from there, what I want you to do is go back to Genesis 12 for a minute. Go back to Genesis 12. Genesis 12 is the very first mention that we have. The Abrahamic covenant is mentioned multiple times throughout. And you can see that back on your chart. The Abrahamic covenant is mentioned in Genesis 12. It's mentioned in Genesis 15. It's mentioned in Genesis 17. It's repeated over and over again. In Genesis chapter number 12, at the very outset, I want you to see at the very beginning that God's plan was not a plan just for Jewish people. His plan was not just to minister to the Jews, not just to minister to the Jewish people. But you'll notice with me in Genesis 12, and begin reading in verse number 1, the Bible says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." Verse 3, "And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee," notice this, "in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." Now, see that there? All families of the earth. God's plan from Genesis 12:3 was to use the Jewish people and through the Jewish people to bring about blessing to all families of the earth. Now, I don't see there's any qualification. I don't think he's saying here, my goal is to bless all of the people in your family. He's not saying I'm going to bless everybody that comes after you, but he says all families of the earth would be blessed as a result of what I'm going to do with you. Now, how do we know? How did God do that? Ultimately, through the Jewish people came the Messiah, the birth of Jesus, the Christ, and through the Christ, through the blessing of Jesus, all the families of the earth can be blessed, and they can be blessed as a result of the redemptive work that happened at Calvary. Jesus, when he died for every man, woman, boy, and girl. He died for all the sin that had ever been committed, ever would be committed. He paid for it one time at Calvary in that transaction that took place. So because Christ has done that, all the families of the earth can be blessed, Jew and Gentile alike. So the thought here is this: God has always had, from the very beginning, a worldwide plan. He was not like, oh man, my people rejected me, what am I going to do? He wasn't like, he didn't get to that place and start wringing his hands. God has never wrung his hands in worry or concern, right? I mean, some people, it was said years ago, has it ever occurred to you that nothing has ever occurred to God? Right? So again, this was all part of his plan from the very beginning when he called Abraham. So the point of this is to help us understand that just because the Old Testament people of God, the Jewish people, just because they came to a place where they rejected him and they were set aside, doesn't mean that God's plan has been thwarted. No, God still has a plan both for the Jewish people and for the Gentile people. He's working out that plan. God has not stopped working that plan. So let's talk about how that plan works and how the Gentiles really in the Bible interact with the Jewish people.